"This isn't for just anyone," the teller muttered, holding the check with 2 fingers like it was dirty. The sentence cut through the background noise of the bank like a blade. A few people in line glanced up. Others kept staring at their phones. The man at the counter said nothing. He wore a faded windbreaker and held a folded military cap. Its stitching frayed with time, but the insignia still clear. The teller rolled his eyes. Then, with 2 brisk movements, ripped the check in half and let the pieces fall onto the glass counter like dead leaves. "If you want to file a complaint, the form's over there," he added, already waving the next customer forward. No one moved. The man didn't shout. He simply lowered his eyes, clutched the cap tighter, and slowly picked up the shredded pieces of paper, like they were heavier than they looked. Behind him, a teenager held up a phone, quietly recording. "Next!" But no one stepped forward. If you believe tearing up a veteran's honor should never be policy, type respect below. The veteran didn't speak as he stepped back from the counter, still holding the torn pieces of the Treasury check in one hand, the folded military cap in the other. The bank was quiet now, not silent, just restrained. People knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to be the first to say it. He took a seat near the window, not too far from the line, not too close to the door. He didn't slump. He didn't fume. He simply sat upright, one leg straight, the other ending at a polished prosthetic. His name was Harold E. Grant, Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired. The prosthetic was custom-fitted but modest. The cap in his hand had the insignia of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, worn, sun-faded. Along the brim, stitched in blue thread, a single name, Holloway. The teller never asked about the name. Never asked about the ID Harold had placed gently on the glass. VA identification, driver's license, a paper letter from the Treasury, all ignored. Earlier, he had stood patiently in line, watching the seconds on the wall clock tick by. The check had been in his inside jacket pocket, flat, protected. It wasn't large by most standards, but it had taken 9 years to be approved. 9 years of fighting red tape for compensation tied to a spinal injury sustained during a helicopter extraction gone wrong. His back would never be the same. But it wasn't the injury that wore him down. It was the waiting, the proving, the needing to explain his worth over and over. And when the approval finally came through, the first thing he did was plan the roof repair on the house he had once shared with Captain Elena Holloway, his wife. She had passed 3 winters ago. The check came too late for her. But it wasn't about that anymore. It was about finishing what he'd promised her. Keep the house safe. Keep her flag flying. Now the check, her check, was in pieces. From behind the glass, the teller looked over at him with vague discomfort, then turned to whisper something to the branch manager. The man, balding and stiff in posture, gave a quick shrug. The kind of shrug that says, "Just another cranky old guy with a story." No one asked what happened. No one offered help. A woman near the coffee station glanced over, hesitated, then looked away as if she hadn't seen anything. Harold leaned forward slightly, not to stand, just to breathe. He pulled the torn halves of the check from his lap, lined them up carefully, and placed them flat on the bench beside him. The name, U.S. Treasury, was still visible along the top. He pressed the cap on top of them like a weight. His eyes didn't look angry. They looked steady, focused, as if he had already lived through worse, and knew this wasn't the end of the story. The branch manager didn't walk over, not right away. He peeked from behind a glass door, saw Harold still seated, and gestured to the teller with a quick, dismissive motion. "Not now, just move on." Jessica, the teller, gave a tight-lipped nod and returned to typing, already calling the next person forward. But the mood had changed. A customer at the end of the line whispered something to the woman in front of him. "I saw the seal on that check," he said quietly. "That was government issue." She didn't respond, just crossed her arms and stared ahead. At the far side of the room, a security guard leaned on a column, arms folded, watching without making any move. The badge on his chest gleamed under the fluorescence. but his eyes slid away when Harold glanced up. Harold didn't speak. He lifted the cap from the bench beside him and retrieved the 2 torn halves of the check with both hands. Slowly, he placed them inside a folded sheet of paper, like something ceremonial, and returned it to the inside pocket of his jacket. He sat still for a moment, then noticed a teenager across the room. The boy had a phone in hand, recording quietly from behind his backpack. Their eyes met. Harold didn't flinch. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. The boy's expression shifted from curiosity to something else. Discomfort, maybe. Respect, even. Before anything else could happen, the teller noticed the phone. "Hey," she snapped, "you can't record in here." "That's against bank policy," she pointed. Everyone turned. The teen, startled, tried to lower the phone, but in his panic, it slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. The teller stepped out from behind the counter, snatched it up, and without another word, tossed it onto a nearby chair. "Be glad I don't call security," she added, loud enough for the entire room to hear. The guard didn't move. Neither did anyone else. Harold slowly rose from the bench, walked over to the chair, picked up the phone, and handed it back to the boy. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He turned, walked back to his seat, and resumed his position as if the room hadn't shifted, as if the air weren't now heavy with shame. But no one apologized. No one intervened. Even the branch manager, still behind glass, simply turned away and closed his office door. Harold sat there in stillness. His cap rested again on his lap. His eyes looked toward the sunlight coming through the window, not in hope, but in memory. In silence. This was not the first time he'd been looked at and not seen. Harold didn't move for several minutes. The sounds of the bank faded behind him, muffled keystrokes, murmured complaints, the low hum of air conditioning. Time had slowed to something weightless. Then, with the precision of a man who'd packed combat kits under fire, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and removed a small, folded piece of lined paper. It was worn, with 3 creases and a single word handwritten on the outside, Holloway. He unfolded it carefully. Inside, written in a steady hand, was a message. No speech, no plea. Just a single, private truth. This check was the last promise I made to her. I told her I'd fix the roof before winter. She believed me. She always did. Harold pressed the note flat on the bench beside him. Then, slowly, he stood up. He walked back to the counter. The line had thinned. The teller wasn't looking at him. She was chatting with the next customer, laughing at something on her monitor. Without a word, he placed the folded note on the edge of her desk. No anger in his hand, no urgency in his motion, just care, quiet, deliberate care. She glanced at it and frowned. "What's this?" He didn't answer. She picked up the note, looked at the name on the outside, Holloway, and then tossed it into the same bin where the pieces of the check had been Harold saw it. He didn't react. He turned and walked to the lobby exit. On the way, he passed the security guard, still leaning on the same column. Their eyes met for a split second. Nothing more. Outside, the sun had shifted. Late afternoon light washed over the pavement, stretching shadows long across the sidewalk. Harold crossed to a bench just outside the entrance and sat down again. Same posture, same silence. He wasn't waiting for anyone, but he wasn't leaving either. From his pocket, he removed the folded check, still torn. From the same pocket, a small envelope with a return address from the VA. He placed both on his lap, rested his hand over them, and looked down the street, as if waiting for time itself to turn back and take the weight with it. Inside, the bank carried on. A vacuum cleaner started in a distant hallway. An overhead chime signaled another transaction. No one spoke his name. No one asked what the note meant. No one realized that the moment they discarded that scrap of paper, that one handwritten message, they discarded more than a check. They discarded memory, promise, love. The teenager hadn't left. After retrieving his phone from Harold's quiet hand, he'd backed away into the corner near the ATM, still recording. His fingers shook, but the camera stayed focused. The app didn't just save the footage, it uploaded it to the cloud. He'd seen the name on the note before the teller threw it away. Holloway. He didn't know what it meant, but something told him it mattered. At home that evening, in a group chat of local veterans and family members, a quiet video popped up. No caption, just a link and the words, "Bank, today, watch till the end." Within minutes, someone replied, "Did you say Holloway?" "That was my commanding officer's name. Her husband was Harold. He was always quiet. Took care of her till the end. I know someone who needs to see this." The message traveled fast. Faster than policy, faster than shame. By morning, a black SUV with federal tags pulled up in front of the Consolidated Trust branch. No sirens, no uniforms, just purpose. The first person to step out was Captain Rachel Holloway, decorated officer of the National Guard, daughter of Captain Elena Holloway. She carried no weapon, only a folder, and the weight of memory. 2 federal agents followed behind her, one from the Treasury Department's Inspector General, the other from the office of the Comptroller of the Currency. They walked in together. Inside, the teller from the day before had already started her shift, brushing crumbs off her desk. The branch manager looked up from his screen and stiffened. Before anyone could speak, Captain Holloway's voice filled the lobby, calm, direct, unmistakable. "Where is Mr. Harold Grant?" The silence was immediate. "He's not here?" she continued. "That's unfortunate. Because what happened in this building wasn't just a violation of protocol, it was a desecration of a promise." She held up a small, sealed evidence envelope. Inside, the note that had been discarded. Recovered, flattened, and preserved. "You tore up a Treasury check. That's one issue. But you also threw away a message from the widower of Captain Elena Holloway, a woman who gave 30 years to this country and died believing her husband would be taken care of." She turned to the teller. "Did you read the note before discarding it?" Jessica shook her head, her lips parting as if to speak. "Don't," Captain Holloway said. "You had your chance." The Treasury agent stepped forward. "This location is now under a federal audit. We are seizing all transaction records, surveillance footage, and incident logs. You will comply immediately." The security guard stepped aside. The bank's mood had changed. The badge on his chest no longer gleamed. Now it seemed heavy. The manager stammered something about misunderstanding, about policy. Captain Holloway ignored him. She walked to the counter where Harold had stood. She laid the envelope gently on the glass. "This is not about money," she said. "It never was." She turned and walked out. "If you believe quiet loyalty deserves louder justice, hit like." Harold hadn't returned to the bank. He didn't expect to. After the note had been thrown away and the last piece of paper folded back into his jacket, he'd sat outside on the same bench, not waiting, not protesting, just present. Now, the bench was empty. But across the street, in the morning light, a new SUV pulled to the curb. Captain Holloway stepped out alone. She walked up to the old wooden gate of the modest brick house, clean, sturdy, with a small garden trimmed by discipline and memory. She didn't need to knock. The gate creaked open, and Harold stood there, still in his windbreaker, cap in hand. They didn't hug. They didn't salute. They just looked at each other, for a long, silent moment. Then she handed him a plain envelope. No seal. No flair. Inside, a new Treasury check, issued and verified, expedited by the office of the Secretary himself. Along with it, a small folded sheet, the original handwritten note, recovered from the bank's trash, pressed flat and preserved. Harold held both items for several seconds. Then, he stepped aside and gestured toward the porch. They sat, not speaking, just watching the light filter through the trees onto the front steps. After a minute, Captain Holloway removed a smaller object from her coat pocket, a nameplate, the kind affixed to a wall inside military buildings. It read, "Captain Elena Holloway, 3rd Medical Battalion." She placed it gently on the table between them. "It used to hang outside her office," she said softly. "I thought you should have it." Harold didn't cry. He didn't nod. He reached into his pocket and placed his folded cap next to it. The threadbare name, Holloway, aligned almost perfectly with the engraved one. They sat in silence as the wind moved through the porch screen. Across the street, a neighbor paused on his morning walk. He saw the two figures sitting still, the military cap, the nameplate. He didn't interrupt. He simply touched the brim of his own hat and moved on. Inside the bank, the audit continued. Jessica had been suspended indefinitely. The branch manager resigned before the week was out. A memo was circulated across every location of Consolidated Trust Bank, mandating a new training module titled, "Honor is not policy, it's principle." No one in the bank ever saw Harold Grant again. But the video still circulated quietly through veteran groups, church networks, and military family circles. It had no dramatic music, no narration, just the image of a quiet man picking up torn pieces of a check and placing them beneath his cap. That was enough. Harold walks to the back of his house. He opens a storage cabinet, retrieves a small folded American flag, and places it on a newly repaired section of the roof, just beneath the attic window. He doesn't salute. He doesn't smile.
He just looks up toward the sky,
toward the roofline, and holds his cap to his chest. Harold places the flag, holds his cap to his chest. The camera lingers on the roofline. Golden light falling.
If you believe stories like this must live on, subscribe and share this one. With honor and quiet, just as our stories are meant to end.